And he is joining us tonight from New York City. Assemblyman, how are you?
Nice to be back with you, Liz.
So this reform bill, had that authorities reform bill not passed and been signed into law, would this information have been compilable by the comptroller?
Not really. What we did was not just make the system more transparent, but we changed them from what I called Soviet-style bureaucracies into government agencies that finally have somebody checking them out on a daily basis. So the reform is real. It's the biggest reform of state government in 30 years. It means we're going to shut down a lot of authorities. It means that they won't be able to borrow unrestrainedly as they've done. It means that we'll finally figure out how many people they employ. Really good stuff is beginning to happen, and we're very pleased with the first initial results from the reform effort.
I don't think that most New Yorkers really understood this ever until, I don't know, maybe recently when this Reform Act was starting to be pushed. I know that we've been talking about the authorities for a long time and the shadow government, Soviet-style bureaucracy, as you like to call it. But
well, it's the Robert Moses era come
exactly
to
right.
its logical conclusion. These things were started as many as 70 or 80 years ago, but they really took off under Robert Moses and Nelson Rockefeller, and they were a way essentially to borrow outside the New York State Constitution and to do things that they didn't want elected officials to do, like run a subway system. Now, you could make the case that some sort of function like this is needed, but the net result has been out-of-control borrowing, a metastasizing bureaucracy, no public information, people influencing them no one knew. We changed that. They now have to report lobbying contacts. There's a whistleblower program. There's MWBE requirements. They can't do no-bid contracts without the controller looking at them. There's a fiduciary duty, a legal obligation of the trustees of these things to do the right thing. It's real reform. We had a good idea. We built consensus. We didn't yell at people. And in the end, we've made the first major change in Albany in, as I said, about 30 years.
Well, when we look at this report and we see so much off-budget debt is what we're talking about. When the debt is compiled for New Yorkers, it's amazing. I mean, you're talking about, for example, the increase from 05, 06 to 09, 10 is 25% increase. That's how much. I mean, that's $7,900 per household. That's an enormous amount.
But Liz, let's be precise about this. There is some kind of debt that doesn't offend anybody. When you borrow money to build a subway system, that makes much more sense than paying cash at the beginning, because what it means is that the people who will be using that new subway system 25 years from now, they'll be helping to pay off the debt.
Right.
The problem has been when these have been used to float borrowings that have been used not for capital expenses, but for something else. That's where the real problem comes in, not the full amount of money by a long shot that you're talking about is necessarily bad debt, but a lot of it is, and that's the part we're going to crack down on.
Okay, so when you talk about cracking down, where do we go from here? Now that there is some kind of picture that's coming into place about exactly what we're talking about when we talk about New York's shadow government.
What the new law requires is, first of all, that if they don't have a statutory debt limit, in other words, if there isn't a law that says you can't borrow any more than this, they have to start creating one. And that, I think, will take 6 months, a year, year and a half. But sooner or later, we'll be able to put limits on the borrowing of all of these places. The second thing it does is start looking at the operations of these authorities. For example, take compensation. In Fulton County, in Greene County, downstate, we have found extraordinary things. Local economic development corporations paying their executives $3 million in bonuses for doing essentially government work. Yeah. It's wrong. It was hidden. Those are the things that we're uncovering. I am a great believer, and we should be reforming Albany more than we have. But here's real good news. We actually put together a coalition. We talked to the good government groups. We held hearings. We exposed the things that needed exposure. I don't know if you remember Al D'Amato's famous $500,000 check for one phone call. We use the legislative process to make things different. It's just kicking in. I'm worried about some of it. I don't think the ABO, the Authority Budget Office, the new COP we created, is being aggressive enough in enforcing the law. They're certainly doing a very good job in transparency and having these new authorities and old authorities report the realities. But look, change is difficult, as Obama has found out. We need to persevere. We need to pass the right kinds of law, and then we need a little patience when those laws actually kick in.
So one of the things that Andrew Cuomo has proposed as part of his New York agenda, which is the platform that he is proposing as part of his gubernatorial campaign, is shutting down some of these authorities, and he calls it right-sizing government, you know, getting rid of some of these redundant authorities or authorities that have become unwieldy. I would assume that you support that idea.
Oh, we're way ahead of that. I mean, I'm delighted to see Andrew weighing in here. It's helpful and it's thoughtful. But Sam Hoyt and I have a bill to close 140 of them right now. We have asked the ABO to give us a list of others that we can close. So I actually think the authority reform thing is a model for how Andrew could get his arms around the gubernatorial agencies, which is something I think he can and will concentrate on.
Let's talk about him a little bit, because just today he's out with a very interesting new advertisement that we've talked about that is really unusually hard-hitting against the legislature, although he says he speaks specifically to cleaning up Albany, about Albany being a mess, about dysfunction. You know, there's been a lot of speculation about how he will work with the legislature. The last governor who tried to steamroll the